Good day. All protocols are respectfully observed. I am honored to be here with you virtually today to share a little bit about the study on sexual harassment in the workplace in the Gambia that was commissioned by the National Human Rights Commission and with funding from the UNDP. I think possibly everybody has a copy of the full report, which is very in depth. So, what I'll attempt to do, especially in the limited allocated time, is just to give some highlights related to the study design, but also in terms of the key findings of the study and the way forward. We do know that when it comes to sexual harassment generally, that everyone has a right to walk from violence and harassment, including sexual harassment. It is also recognized as a form of discrimination and violence against women and girls. For this particular study, as the first major study on the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace, we took an exploratory approach that was used in order to gather as many relevant information as possible. The objective of the research was really to collect a baseline for future and more expansive studies. The study report provides detailed findings of an investigation into workplace sexual harassment, focusing on the public sector, the private sector, and non governmental organizations, NGOs in the Gambia. We also, in terms of the report and the study itself, we conducted analysis that provides benchmark information on the nature and extent of workplace sexual harassment in a bid to establish suitable interventions, policies, systems, and programs that will facilitate behavioral changes for the protection and mitigation against all forms of workplace sexual harassment. Currently, there are no available statistics on the magnitude and prevalence of sexual harassment in the Gambia, but it has become clear, especially from reports that sexual and gender-based violence has become a common practice in families at the community level, in institutions, and at the state levels. Given the endemic problem of general lack of information and data on sexual harassment in the Gambia, this study, specifically in terms of scope, focuses on sexual harassment in the workplace. As I said, the study assesses the nature and magnitude of sexual harassment that is experienced by both females and male employees in the public, private, and NGO sectors with the goal of facilitating better protection measures. Against this background, the study, as I said, was commissioned by the National Human Rights Commission with funding from the United Nations Peace Building Fund through the UNDP and the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. The overall goal of the research was to explore sexual harassment in the workplace, in the public sector, in the private sector, as well as NGOs. It specifically aims to identify gaps in relevant laws, policies, regulatory and institutional frameworks, examine the magnitude, nature, and effects of sexual harassment in the workplace, and generate recommendations that could be used to address sexual harassment in the workplace. Just before I go to the study design, I just wanted to highlight that, when we talk about sexual harassment, it's usually characterized by two elements. One, a hostile environment, and what we call quid pro quo, which translate to this for that. On the one hand, quid pro quo involves the use of rewards and punishment from a senior person in an organization to a subordinate. A person in authority usually uses their position and power to ask for sexual favors by means of rewards or punishment. On the other hand, a hostile work environment occurs as a result of persistent unwanted sexual attention, characterized by sexual jokes, comments, and other behaviors that makes the workplace unconducive, unwelcoming, and unpleasant for the victims and survivors. In terms of the study design, specifically the methods, a wide range of data collection methods were used. Four tools were specifically used to facilitate data collection for the study. This comprised of the desktop research that was done, especially in terms of doing a legal analysis of existing laws and policies in the Gambia. We also conducted key informant interviews as well as organizational assessments of key organizations, as well as focus group discussions and a survey. So as a result, the study used both quantitative and qualitative methods and techniques to baseline the nature and extent of sexual harassment in the workplace. Specifically for the survey itself, the team was able to randomly select and administer 123 questionnaires to workers in public, private, and NGO sectors. The institutions were broadly in the following categories: civil service, the private sector, including banking and finance, retail and textile and information communication and technology institutions and companies. We also had civil society organizations, some security sector, NGOs, INGOs, academia, workers union, and a little bit of the informal sector, even though, as I said, specifically the main focus of the study itself was on the formal sector. The employee survey was specifically focused on collecting baseline information on the perceptions and knowledge on sexual harassment, personal experience, and reporting of the issue. From January 25th to February 8th this year, trained enumerators administered the questionnaires to individuals in their workplaces, and we also made the survey available online as well. Regarding the key informant interviews, we did it with selected key actors such as policymakers, NGOs, labor inspectors, and arbitration commissions, as well as independent institutions to provide insights on sexual harassment. Equally, we conducted 2 focus group discussions, which were organized with members of civil society and the private sector through the Bankers Association, comprising of human resources managers of major banks. Board meetings actually took place via Zoom as time was short, and we were also observing COVID-19 guidelines and measures. A third FDG with members of trade unions was also held in person whilst following all guidelines and measures. The organizational assessment that we conducted with various organizations was mainly focused on policy availability, channels that are available for reporting, and protection and prevention measures. And the organizations included government institutions, included civil society organizations like the Gambia Bar Association, as well as other institutions as well, including independent institutions, including the National Human Rights Commission, as well as the Ombudsman. Just before I go into the study findings, I just wanted to say that the study is without limitations. Obviously, due to time and resources, the study is not a national one, and therefore the findings, which might provide insights into the issue, cannot be generalized to the whole of the Gambia. However, attempts were made to have some employees from the rural areas participate through telephone interviews, as well as completion of the organizational assessment from local government councils and local government councils. Another limitation of the study is that we were unable to determine the economic impact or cost of workplace sexual harassment that is attaching a monetary value to the economic loss that the country, individual companies or organizations, as well as the employees affected incur due to effects of sexual harassment. This might possibly be an avenue for further research as well. As I said earlier, also, given that the main focus of the study is mainly on the formal sector, the results also are unable to reflect the reality for people, especially women in the informal sector, which we know is a significant number of the population. So in a sense, some of the limitations and the scope, as a result of the scope of the study, some of the areas and the gaps are possibly future areas of study for organizations as well as for government. So just briefly, in terms of key findings, for the legal findings in which we did doctrinal analysis of existing laws and policies at the national level, but also we looked at international human rights instruments and initiatives. I think in a sense, I think one of the key things that comes out of the legal analysis is that generally we have a plethora of laws that protect, for instance, mostly women from violence, including sexual violence. However, for instance, most of the laws do not explicitly mention sexual harassment, including the Sexual Offences Act of 2013. However, with the exception of the Domestic Violence Act. However, we do know that the Domestic Violence Act limits sexual harassment in the domestic setting and does not also recognize sexual harassment in marriage. So I think as a result, and I'll talk about this a little bit, it is also vital that not only that laws, like the different laws that we have, do not only cover sexual harassment, but we also do need to have a comprehensive anti-sexual harassment law in the Gambia. Coming to the key findings of the survey, I'll just break it down into some thematic areas. And as I said, I'll try to be as brief as possible. In terms of perception and prevalence and nature of sexual harassment, an overwhelming majority at 85% of all respondents confirmed the prevalence or occurrence of sexual harassment in the workplace. The study finds that about 74% of workers indicate that they have experienced sexual harassment, and 80% of women who responded actually stated that they experienced sexual harassment in the workplace in the last 5 years, compared to men at 67%. On the nature of workplace sexual harassment, the most common forms of sexual harassment that occurred in the past 5 years were at 17% sexually suggestive comments or jokes that made people feel offended, also as well as inappropriate staring that made people feel intimidated, but other instances were repeated or inappropriate invitations to go out on dates, as well as intrusive questions and indecent phone calls, among others. I think what the study findings indicate is that workplace sexual harassment was mostly likely to occur at an individual's workstation or where they work. More than 60% of the people who were sexually harassed at the workplace noted that this happened on more than one occasion. On who are the victims and the perpetrators. The survey results indicate that people may experience workplace sexual harassment differently due to characteristics such as gender and age. Women were more likely than men to have been sexually harassed in the workplace in the last 5 years. About 56% of women compare with 44% of men. Women are more than likely to experience sexual harassment as well. This finding is premised and is very much reflective on the notion that sexual harassment is about power that reinforces social inequalities. Typically, sexual harassment is about humiliation and control, and it doesn't occur in most cases between equals, but in most cases, the perpetrator has greater financial, physical, or social power, including the power of reprisal, than the victim with the power of reprisal rather. People aged 18 to 19 were more likely than those in other groups to have been sexually harassed in the workplace compared to other age categories. In addition, the study also finds that the majority of workplace sexual harassment was perpetrated by men, and majority of respondents identify men, 61%, as perpetrators of sexual harassment in the workplace compared to women at 39%. The data also indicates that about 94% of female victims of workplace sexual harassment were sexually harassed by male actors, by male perpetrators rather, as well as the fact that majority of the sexual harassment that occurred also involved a single perpetrator. The study results also indicate that sexual harassment which occurred in the workplace was more often perpetrated by a co-worker who was more senior to a female victim and co-worker employed at the same level for male victims. And I think this just sets up, reiterates what I just stated, especially in terms of the equal power relations and the fact that when it comes to the elements of sexual harassment, mostly female victims will be within the context of quid pro quo. So the more senior perpetrator can withhold benefits, including promotion. But on the other hand, for male victims, it's most likely a hostile work environment in which the sexual the form of sexual harassment is unwelcome and makes the work environment not conducive as well. On the issue of reporting of workplace sexual harassment, majority of people who actually experience sexual harassment in the workplace did not make a formal report or complaint. Some of the most common reasons for not reporting included reasons around the fact that it was easier to keep quiet and that the reporting will be embarrassing, especially for female victims, but also for male victims as well. And I think this speaks to, the whole idea of masculinity and how, for instance, in most cases, most people do not think that male or men can experience sexual harassment because it's supposed to be seen as complementary and so forth. And other reasons the victims thought it was that it would not change things or that nothing will happen, and that also they were not aware of the complaint process as well. Among those that did not report or make a complaint about the harassment, they also stated that they did not do so because it was easier to just to be quiet as well in relation to that. I think generally the incidents of sexual harassment remain equally underreported due to stigmatization and victim shaming and the lack of protection and support systems in most places, including procedures and processes that protects third-party reporting for whistleblowers. In terms of the outcome, the most common outcomes were that the perpetrator apologized to 21%. Others were that the perpetrator was formally warned, that somebody, whether it was the manager or a co-worker, informally spoke to the perpetrator as well, and in some cases that the perpetrator did not face any sort of consequences. For victims that made a report or complaint about the incident, 22% stated that then the harassment actually stopped, and they did receive an apology and a positive feedback for making the complaint. On the impact and cost of sexual harassment, the data shows that by and large, when employees experience workplace sexual harassment, they feel extremely intimidated. This translates into mental health and stress. And more women than men also said that the incident had impacted negatively on their self-esteem and confidence, while male respondents are more likely to report that there were no long-term consequences for them. Generally, on policies and systems availability, the study findings indicate that on average, most organizations and companies do not have policy on sexual harassment, which are therefore non-existent. The systems and procedures necessary to facilitate reporting, punish perpetrators, and address sexual harassment cases in the workplace are not there. In certain cases, government and NGOs rely on general laws and policies on gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. Therefore, there is the need for companies and organizations to establish policy guidelines and establish clear procedures and systems for reporting and imposing penalties on perpetrators. And I think, in a way, that was the second arm of the work that was conducted in terms of developing a generic national workplace policy that organizations and institutions can adapt. Just in terms of, just to briefly conclude, especially in terms of recommendation, as I stated in the beginning, whilst we know that the country has a plethora of laws that address gender-based violence generally, including sexual harassment, the laws do not explicitly, in most cases, address sexual harassment in the workplace. Also, as I stated, in terms of availability of mechanisms and procedures, it's also very much limited, and there are only few government institutions and organizations that have adopted a workplace anti-sexual harassment policy. Therefore, based on the findings, the study makes the following recommendations: that specifically government should ratify the ILO Convention number 190 on violence and sexual harassment that was adopted in June of 2019, as well as to popularize it. It is also recommended that government enacts a comprehensive law that addresses sexual harassment and effectively implements it. In addition to putting in place mechanisms for effectively reporting of sexual harassment in the public sector, as well as, I think in addition, as I said, given that this is not a national study, it is important that government undertakes a comprehensive national study on sexual harassment in the workplace. For private sectors as well as NGOs, including workers' union, there is need to formulate, adopt, and implement anti-sexual harassment workplace policies and code of conduct, train staff on prevention of sexual harassment, as well as put in place the necessary mechanisms to facilitate reporting and investigation of cases. In addition to developing awareness-raising materials on sexual harassment, as well as popularizing it among staff. The study that we conducted on sexual harassment in the workplace provides an opportunity to address a huge gap in current scholarship and literature on the issue in the Gambia. The study attempts to contribute to existing knowledge, which will serve as a source of empirical literature for future studies in the related areas. The findings of the study provide insight into the nature, magnitude, and prevalence of sexual harassment. Whilst, as I stated before, the results of the study do not indicate the size and the extent of the problem in the Gambia as a whole, yet it is suggestive of the prevalence of the problem. We hope that the findings of this study will bring about a public appreciation of the effects of sexual harassment on employees and others in the workplace, the enactment of comprehensive legislation against sexual harassment, and more in depth studies on sexual harassment in all sectors. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the findings of the report, and I hope that you find the report useful. Thank you for your attention.